As we've been reporting, Iranian attacks on Gulf energy facilities have caused the price of oil and gas to soar. Europe's benchmark price for natural gas rose by 35% at the market open. The global crude benchmark, Brent crude, rose as high as $116 a barrel. That's the highest price since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Joining us now from London is James Meadway. He's the co-director of Verdant, an economic policy think tank, and a former UK Treasury official. Good to see you, James. Thank you for being with us here on Al Jazeera. My first question for you is, how significant is this jump for oil and gas prices that we're seeing so far today, in your estimation?
Well, it confirms what we probably would have expected over the last couple of weeks, that this isn't going to be a temporary blip in the price of oil and gas in particular, that perhaps a few weeks ago you might have thought it would be possible for example, the Bank of England rate setters, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank to look through this rise in prices when they're setting interest rates and say that, okay, it's going to be temporary, the war will be over quickly and things will return to normal. What's happened now is that in addition to the Strait of Hormuz being blocked, we now have a severe and disruption to the basic production of oil and gas especially, that will take months and months to clear. So at this point, it looks like this will be a substantial increase in those prices stretching off into the distance.
And when we talk about the damage to these facilities, how big of an impact does that have, not just in the short term in the gas prices, but in the long-term recovery from the war, whenever that may be, and getting capacity back up to where it might have been before?
Well, the challenge here is how much damage there is and how long before you can switch back in, before you can make repairs and get things back online. It is relatively quick if it's sort of relatively superficial hits on pipelines and some parts of infrastructure. It's any more fundamental. This is a substantial piece of work to be done. That's a slightly technical question here. The issue facing other governments and other businesses and everybody else around the world is whether there are reasonable substitutes that can be made for oil and gas during this period of time. We found the Spanish Prime Minister talking up the fact that his country is producing a great deal of energy now from renewables, and a number of European countries, the UK included, do now source a significant part of the energy they use, electricity most obviously, from renewable sources. This does provide some protection against some of this. What may well happen around the world, and you've seen this from big oil price shocks in the past, most famously and notoriously in the 1970s, is a switch out of fossil fuels into searching for other alternative sources of fuels and for trying to make your use of fossil fuels rather more efficient. But that can't happen very quickly. And that's a long-term process of business investment and switching over energy use, happening already with renewables, of course, but some processes are heavily dependent on gas, like producing fertilizer, and it's going to be a long, slow time before there are real substitutes.
Of course. And there are, of course, some countries that maybe don't have that investment in renewables yet that are going to have to figure out what to do in the short term. We're already seeing some countries give workers off one day a week or tell people not to drive on certain days of the week to try to alleviate some of that pressure. How concerned are countries at this point about conserving fuel and conserving oil and gas because of the unpredictability of this conflict at this point?
Well, increasingly, you've seen it in Southeast Asia, especially where this is the primary export market for gas coming out of the Gulf. So Philippines, Thailand, India, a few places that are heavily dependent on those exports, in particular, starting to try and find ways to restrict use. So as you mentioned, reducing working hours, reducing the number of days people are in work, some smaller things like asking people not to wear formal wear to the office so they don't have to turn the air conditioning up so much. I mean, there's a range of different options here. But the general impression is two things: that in the short term, if you don't have quick substitutes for gas and for oil, and you have to restrict your use of them, you're looking at a reduction in economic activity, so it's a big hit to GDP and to growth, and on the other side, a hit to government finances, both because of less economic activity, and also you get demands, not unreasonably, for people saying we need support. Households don't want to pay the massive great increase and can't afford to pay the massive great increase in their heating and electricity and energy costs more generally. So governments step in. That's a problem for governments that are already significantly indebted.
That's right. And EU ministers are meeting in Brussels today. What could they conceivably decide to do to ease any of this?
There are not many options because much of what they might want to do is on a national sort of policy level. So what you probably find is versions of what the EU did last time. We had a big surge in energy prices across the continent, which is many different national governments introducing different versions of protection for households and protection for businesses in particular. Last time, despite some really apocalyptic predictions, Europe was relatively fast in switching to alternative energy sources and economising on the use of natural gas in particular, but it has come at the cost of slower growth over that period of time. The other one, of course, is what the European Central Bank meeting later today to make its decision on interest rates will decide to do. Again, there isn't that much that interest rates are necessarily going to do to affect the situation in the supply of gas. You put up the interest rate in Brussels or Frankfurt, it doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz, but they will be considering potentially looking at interest rates rising into the future.
James Meadway, good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you.
Thank you.